a name meaning hillcrest. Our father, the Reverend Henry Erskine, who had once served the Earl of Mar, ejected from his pulpit ministry by the 1662 Act of Uniformity, yet maintaining his Christian convictions, field preaching at conventicles for those faithful praying societies of his former congregants. We may need now only remember by the Erskine riddle of how my elder brother Ebenezer was born after our mother died. But we can't for another evening. For his Christian convictions, Henry Erskine, imprisoned on Bass Rock, imprisoned at Newcastle, often exiled parish to parish. Henry Erskine, shaping the Christian convictions of a young man named Thomas Boston, who later recommended to fellow ministers to read Edward Fisher's The Marrow of Modern Divinity, to generate healthy conversations on law and gospel in the Church of Scotland. Those who upheld the positive aspects of EF's dialogue on legalism and licentiousness became known as the representers, marrow men. We who promoted the free offer of the gospel, including my brother Ebenezer and I would take up the challenge not only in my sermons, but in my gospel sonnets. The gospel grace and law commands both bind and loose each other's hands. They can't agree on any terms, yet hug each other in their arms. Our efforts for the free offer of the gospel often cost us callings to various churches. My brother rallied against the Patronage Act of 1712, Ebenezer highlighting that Jesus Christ is Lord of the church, the King of his kingdom. On the 10th of October 1732, Ebenezer preaching from the 118th Psalm, citing verse 22, that Jesus, not the laird, not the wealthy landowner, Jesus was a cornerstone of the church. This led to Ebenezer being censored for his preaching against the bondage of patronage. On the 5th of December 1733, a day of prayer in a public house near Garney Bridge, just south of Kinross, my brother Ebenezer Erskine, the esteemed William Wilson, the aristocratic Alexander Moncrief, and James Fisher, Ebenezer's son-in-law. Thomas Mayer and I also attended and witnessed these four gentlemen on the 6th of December at 2 o'clock in the afternoon establish an associate presbytery, later to be called derisively seceders, a secession sect from the Church of Scotland. After numerous exchanges of pamphlet publications defining and defending themselves, they were formally, officially deposed in 1740. By 1747, this now associate synod underwent their own internal disharmony and then discord in what is known as the Great Breach between Ebenezer and Alexander Moncrief and his protege, Adam Gibb. Ebenezer took on the role of teaching for our side of the divide, becoming the professor of the Divinity Hall, combining the Christian convictions of our father with educational excellence. Ebenezer taught one or perhaps two sessions while enduring ill health with his protege, Thomas Clark, preaching on occasion for him. Thomas Clark had been educated under Alexander Moncrief, and was licensed April 1748 under the Erskines. In 1751, Thomas Clark was ordained as a minister in Ireland, in William McKinley's field, because no building could contain the crowd that had gathered. Yet, in January 1754, Clark was arrested in Newblies, Ireland, at the instigation of Irish Presbyterian ministers who were jealous of his intruding seceder influence in Ireland. Clark would say that his lips had not acquired their taste of flute and drupe. While under this town arrest, Clark baptized some 13 children and officiated the marriage ceremony, supposedly from that prison cell in Monaghan, Ireland, to one John Harris, to Eleanor Reynolds. In 1762, Clark's wife, Elizabeth Nesbitt, aged 32 years, went to her Lord and would be buried in what is referred to as the beehive sarcophagus of Cahans, her last earthly resting place, there along with Clark's son Robert, who had died also. In 1764, Clark emigrated to the colonies of America, leading 300 of his Scottish and Irish parishioners on that Atlantic voyage, including his 3 young children, Ebenezer, age 10, Elizabeth, age 6, and Benjamin, age 4. Some of Clark's community joined their relations in the Carolinas, and others went with him to a settlement in the northeast of Albany in New York province. Clark served as both a medical doctor and a minister, not only to his Scot-Irish colonials, but also from the Netherlands and German lands, and even Huguenots from France. Clark, with 2 elders, would visit these families, especially during the Lord's Supper services, determining the depth of their Christian convictions. He would ask questions to the head of the household, usually the elder man. Questions like, explain the offices of Christ in his humiliation. Relate the riches of justifying faith. Clark using these catechism moments for edifying, for promoting educational excellence among all his congregants. One time, the head of the household shrugged as though misunderstanding the questions, perhaps not understanding the King's English in Clark's heavy Scottish brogue. So Clark addressed his questions to other members of the household. The next day, Clark came upon the elder man whose cart had stopped in the road. It seems like his donkey was reenacting Balaam's tale. He was refusing to go forward. So the elder man was berating the donkey with fine English profanity. To which Clark answered, I see you learned your English, and it's nigh good English either. Imagine Clark in his 60s. Clark amidst the war of independence, amidst redcoats and rebels, traveling up and down the East Coast. During one such journey, Clark, on the Lord's Day, on the Christian Sabbath, saw a meeting house, a kirk, some worship service, and instead he came upon a country fair, with its focus being on a Sunday horse race. Clark offered to the officials to pray, because horse racing was a dangerous sport. Someone might crack his skull or heave a leg. The officials agreed, so Clark prayed a Presbyterian prayer, a long prayer, that people on this Lord's Day might not be trampled underfoot, that children might not tread accidentally under the track and be crushed and maimed. A long Presbyterian prayer that cut to the core with its contents, and so convicting its hearers that they ceased the race, repented with tears flowing from their eyes, and they held a revival. Despite these charming anecdotes, historian George Howe would describe Thomas Clark as uncouth, even ridiculously so. Clark's broad Scot accent, his Scot attire, his confessional adherence, and his strong exclusive psalmody, too odd for civilized colonial company. Yet George Howe noted Clark's amazing ability of sharing the gospel, especially with children, Christian convictions, with educational excellence. And children, parents, they grow up. And as a community of adults, as they considered naming their new Associate Reformed Academic Institution, they chose in 1837 Clark and Erskine Seminary. I hold your haggis. Less than a decade later, the name Clark would be removed from the college and seminary. However, a few decades after that, the U.S. Female College petitioned the Associate Reformed Synod to consider changing their name of their school. Their first choice, Clark College. Quote, in honor of Thomas Clark, one of the founders of our church. Unquote. I give you Clark. I give you Erskine, your history, your honest and earnest heritage for hope that Christian convictions might be expressed and expressed well in educational excellence.
Especially because I'm not dressed as a part. But it's a pleasure for me to be here, and some of my students are here, and I had to mention that this is not an argumentative paper, so that you know that I will not betray the art that I'm carefully teaching you. I'm telling a story today. And tonight I'm going to introduce you to a woman who's deeply connected to the history of the West, an educator who devoted her life to see that women who would have access to excellent higher education during a time when Erskine College was still just a male-only college. Her name is Lila Morse Bonner. And her story illustrates the qualities that are also evident to anyone who becomes familiar with the story of Erskine College and its sister school, the Due West Female College: vision, resilience, and faith. I came across her name in our archives over the summer while I was conducting research on the Due West Female College. Lila Morse, she will become the future Mrs. Bonner, was only 18 when in 1859 she left her home near Utica, New York, to come teach in the South. So she was a Northerner, hence the title of my presentation, A Northerner with a Southern Heart. After securing a position at a primary school located in Abbeville County, in fact, we saw in one of the slides that she was in the area of Long Plain and Cedar Spring, where actually the ARP church was located. Shortly after her arrival, Mrs. Morse had connected with a group of other women that, like her, had come to teach to Abbeville from the north. Remember, those were the years immediately before the Civil War. One of those women was Kate Patton Wilderman, who was a native of Abbeville, but had received her education at the Troy Female Seminary in Troy, New York. The school was founded in 1821 and was the first female college in the United States of America, and it was the product of Emma Willard's determination to offer women the same rigorous academic opportunities that up until then were only available to men. Lila Morse had attended at least one term at the Troy Female Institute or Seminary, but it is not probable that the two, Kate and Lila, had met because Kate was 10 years older than Lila. Nevertheless, it is reasonable to speculate that Lila Morse's decision to move to Abbeville County, such a remote place in the corner of the South, was actually the result of connections established through the Troy Female Seminary and the ARP Church. It was actually quite strong in that area of New York, as we also learned. As the bond between the two women grew, Emma Willard's passion for women's higher education might have resurfaced in the conversations between Lila and Kate. During this time, it also happened that Kate's brother, Edmund L. Patton, was the president of Erskine College. And at the same time, there was a group of members of the ARP Church in Due West that began discussing the need to establish a school to, quote, to give our young women equal educational advantages with our young men. And, quote, particularly an education under decisive Christian influences and in a Christian environment, end quote. These discussions were quickly turned into a vision, and as quickly the vision turned into reality. On November 1st, 1859, a public meeting was held in Due West, and during the meeting, the first board of trustees was for the new Due West Female College was elected. We're talking fast. Vision and reality is coming true. The vision was grand, but the budget was modest. The founding members, and you might recognize some names, J.I. Bonner, Reverend R.C. Greer, who had also been president of Erskine for over 10 years prior to this meeting until 1859, and Reverend Jonathan Galloway. They all pledged $500 with the intent to continue to then raise funds in the Abbeville community. In the words of an alumni, Mrs. J.W. Thompson, those words were spoken in occasion of the 50th anniversary of the college. She says, "The past of the Women's College is worthy of record. It is a story of commendable achievement in the fact of adverse conditions. He who controls in the affairs of men and who knows their ideals and aspirations, as well as their struggles and difficulties, as he looks on the work of the past half-century, says to those who have brought on this institution, well done." Almost immediately, Lila Morse became a vital contributor of the new academic enterprise and remained associated with the Due West Female College for over 3 decades. So she was barely a teenager when she started teaching at the Due West Female College. She was, for over 3 decades, first as a teacher of piano and music, then vice principal, and finally as president of the Due West Female College. It was thanks to the original connection that she had established with Kate Patton Wideman that she obtained the professorship at the Due West Female College in October of 1861. When she began teaching at the college, though, the situation was not as fancy as one would expect. In fact, the college had moved out from the old crammed rooms that were in the back of the ARP church. In fact, despite the lack of substantial funds, the board, quote, the board and the community were in earnest in their purpose to establish a high-grade institution. And the construction of the new building started almost immediately, even if, quote, money came in slowly and discouraged. Those quotes come from actually Galloway as he was given an account because he was there during those years. He says money came in slowly and discouragedly since female education was not as popular then as it is now. He was speaking at the beginning of the 1900s. In the words of J.C. Galloway, it is impossible today for us to realize the courage, patience, faith, and far-reaching vision of the founders of the college when we consider the poverty and the fewness of its supporters. Yet, what we know now as Bonner Hall was inaugurated as soon as the walls reached the proper stage with the placing of the corner store that we see over there. The placing of the corner store and the insertion inside of a time capsule in a niche north of the side of the porticos in Bonner Hall. Pictures of the 3 founding faculty members, a copy of the telescope, it was the Due West newspaper, a copy of the minutes of that original first town meeting, and other memorabilia were placed inside the box. What we see there is the corner store. Inside, we actually have copies of the pictures that we preciously hold in our archives. And the newspaper was burned. Unfortunately, there was a fire in the 60s that destroyed the Bonner, and the box was recovered. The content, some of the content was recovered, but it is very interesting because it's a piece of art history. When Lila Morse began her work at the college, the building was not yet complete, so I'm still talking about Bonner. Of the 3 stories, only 2 could be used because their staircase to the 3rd floor was not yet built. We still didn't have the money to build it. But it wasn't yet done. And she describes the place where she taught as the brick walls were bare plaster. The dining room wing had no floors and was boarded up temporarily. So when I read this, I have to say I stopped complaining about anything that might not always go the way, and I have a beautiful office. While the building was being built, and not long after Lila Morse had started her tenure at the college, the eruption of the Civil War brought another challenge to Due West. Nevertheless, while other institutions were suspending instruction, including Erskine College, the Due West Female College marched on. During his baccalaureate address in July of 1865, Dr. Bonner, the president who carried the college through the Civil War, described the experience. Quote, "Our college was born in a time of political convulsion and cradled amid the quaking of a gigantic struggle. From its earliest days to the present, it has been familiar with the thunders of civil war. The smoke of the battle was hung like a pall around us, and the cries of suffering men and women have constantly filled our ears. Ruin on every side of us, college building burns, library destroyed, endowments swept away in ashes. But amid all this, we have kept on." Lila Morse also has some memories of that time. She says this is the perspective of a very young faculty member that had just started teaching at the Due West Female College. She says, "We saw occasionally Confederate soldiers in their gray uniforms, but the most vivid experience of the war and what it meant was when 3 bodies were brought here and buried in the churchyard in one day. All of us wore homespun dresses, and our shoes were made in a little shop which stood about where it is now the store of Mr. H.M. Young. Occasionally, we could get from Charleston goods that had run the blockade. My salary, the last of the war, was $2,000. I paid $1,000 for board. Confederate land. We did not suffer for food, but I had to do without luxuries." The resilience of the college and of Lila Morse proved extraordinary. Under the administration of Dr. J.I. Bonner, it continued to grow. But the year 1881 proved to be a very difficult year for both the institution and Lila Morse. In the spring of that year, Dr. Bonner died, leaving the institution without a president and Lila Morse without a husband. In fact, on February 3rd of that year, at the age of 40, she had married Dr. Bonner in the presence of the school and his family. While grieving the loss of their leader, the Board of Trustees appointed J.P. Kennedy as his successor. J.P. Kennedy was an Erskine College alumni and dedicated professor who had also taught at Erskine before coming permanently at the Due West Female College. He was the most obvious choice. With Lila Morse Bonner now, and his wife, Lila's old friend Kate. On his side as assistant principals, J.P. Kennedy led the school into an even more prosperous times. In an article on the Abbeville Messenger, dated June 8, 1886, we read, "We have received the annual catalog of this most excellent institution, and it shows that the effort of the president to make it a first-class college for the education of a young lady have not been unappreciated. There were in attendance during this past year 155 pupils. The faculty is very strong and was composed of, and it goes with a list of about 15 faculty members." Later in the article, we find a special note that could be read as a tribute to Lila Morse Bonner. Tireless effort in the music department, because if you remember, she was hired in the music department. And this is what the article stated. "From the organization of the college, special attention has been given to music, instrumental and vocal, regarding it not simply as an ornamental branch, but as being elevating and refining as well. Where the talent for music has been given, it is certainly accompanied by the obligation to cultivate it. Hence, the Due West Female College has from the beginning employed the best music teachers and given all possible opportunities for the study of music." Memorial Hall is dedicated to Lila Morse Bonner. And that's where the concert is going to be, how appropriate. When President Kennedy retired due to health issues in 1887, it was finally Lila Morse Bonner's turn to hold the reins of the institution, and she chose her stepson H.E. Bonner, as her vice principal. She remained in her position until her retirement in 1895, when she finally returned north to her family in upstate New York. After a long life dedicated to teaching women, Lila Morse Bonner died in 1917. I could continue with her story, and maybe one day I will take some time to write it down in a more appropriate manner and detailed manner. But for the sake of time tonight, I want to end with a quote from a speech that was delivered in 1906 by Lila's longtime friend and colleague Kate P. Kennedy during a meeting of the Alumni Association. Quote, "She was northern born, but we are thankful to say that she has a Southern heart that was true to us through the darkest and most trying period of our history. She indeed said to us, 'Thy people shall be my people.' And no Naomi ever had a more faithful daughter. She shared our joys, but more frequently, our sorrows and privations. She wore our homespun dresses. She drank our wheat and bran coffee and our pine top tree, and did not even make ugly faces over it. And if you're here and you're old enough to remember the flavor of those beverages, you can in some measure appreciate the heroism of the act. Mrs. Bonner was part and parcel of this college almost from its beginning. Her old room is full with memory of kindly deeds and loving service. Shall we forget? Thank you.
I'll start off. This is wonderful. Thank you all for coming. This is fun. We're both historians, and I know that we're having a good time. It's a great pathway through Erskine's history, and I guess we started in the 1700s, moved through the 1800s, and now we're moving up to the 1900s. And one of the great things about doing more recent history is that you can go straight to the horse's mouth. That's the introduction, I guess. Speak to people who witnessed and experienced these things firsthand, and that's a really powerful tool, an exceptional opportunity. So we're going to spend some time in the 50s, 60s, and beyond. It really is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jim Geddes, who's a long storied history and great relationship with Erskine as a student, as a professor, an administrator, and we're still dragging you in for things. And, yeah, so warm welcome to you. Thank you very much for coming. So, great. Well, we'll start at the beginning.
I do not have either an Irish, an English, or a Scottish accent.
Okay. I'll take that upon myself. By the way, I didn't know that I was married in the 1760s. And I'll check into that. I have no recollection whatsoever. Well, let's begin in maybe you're early on in life, and you're a native South Carolinian, and I wonder what you were thinking, as many of our students were thinking about coming to college. I wonder what drew you to Erskine and why you came here.
Well, basically legacy. My family, has been Erskine graduates.
Right.
There just wasn't any other place.
That's great. Yeah, your family was way back to the final year, is that right?
My great-grandfather graduated, and I can't remember. His father was the first president, Ebenezer Erskine president. And then everybody down until a couple of generations ago, and our family spread out and goes to elsewhere.
Right. And do you remember whenabouts you came to Erskine? I believe you were born in 1940, is that right?
1940, I came to Erskine in 1958. It was very similar to Erskine today in many ways. It was a small, private, church-related school. And I thought back, he gave me this question ahead of time. I thought back, and there were differences. We did not have parking lots because we did not have cars. It's astonishing to me how many students have cars and how new the cars are. We had few students with cars, and they were old clunkers, basically. And that was one thing. The other thing was we had this in loco parentis attitude, which was not restricted to Erskine. It was common, but exaggerated, I guess, here. The college was the local parents for the students, particularly the girls. so that they had to stay in their dorms after 10:30. When they dated, they had to be back by 10:30. If they violated those times, they got punished. The rules were pretty strict for women. The guys could do anything they wanted. But could not enter the women's campus, which is where Robinson and Carnegie were, the two women doctors. You could not enter that campus after 10:30. Which is their problem, unless it was a special day, which was like once a month. On Saturday, the senior women could date until 11. But there were some exceptions. The literary societies and other groups, after their meetings, would go up there as a group and serenade the girls. And the dorm mothers who watched over the women like hens, you could see them in the background, so they were checking, and you couldn't get off the road, basically. As long as you stood on the road, because the women students would come in and they'd feel, they'd come to the front of the dorm and look out the windows, and we would sing, songs that were appropriate for guys to sing to females. And I can't remember them. I just remember when we finished, it was good night, ladies, and I don't remember the rest of that. We did the other dorm. So that was an exception that we were allowed. And then we had something else, because I was thinking about this, what was it like? How was it different? We had Rat Week. Every college had that. And you got to college and you got a little cap, a beanie, and you wore it. And you were a rat. And the sophomores grabbed you up and marched you all over town and did bad things to you. And you had to polish their shoes and do stuff like that. And we came to hate sophomores. The women had it easier. They got to go up and down the street marching in the daytime. They had to get in the middle of town when those stores are still there, lie down on their backs, throw their arms and legs in the air, and squeal like rats. I don't know what they did other than that, but it was really interesting because it quickly put us together as a group who hated sophomores. And so we bonded in that process. And then the last of the week, the Rat Master King, we called them Rat Masters because they were our masters. The Rat Master King called us all out, and he looked at us and he said, "We've examined you all week. We now think you are acceptable to enter our student body." And we were really emotional. That's what they said they were doing. Yeah. And he said, "Now your Rat Master is going to help you. When you get a problem, just let him know. He'll find the teacher that you're having a problem with and find someone who had that course under that person last year, and they will tutor you. So we are your friends." And that really did bond us to the student body. And he said, we're equal. Seniors, juniors, sophomores, freshmen, doesn't matter. We're all one group. Now, I look back on that, and I don't know why they don't do it today. But I'm sure there'd be suits and all kinds of things. One of the women in our class had her hair washed and it burned her hair. So, differences.
Yeah, some things have changed, some things have not changed. I wonder if we should go to the floor for a minute and ask our students. I mean, is Erskine more strict today than it was in the 50s? No, not at all. Okay. Well, then you had a wonderful educational experience here. That's great. And then you went on to graduate school at USC, down in Columbia, for history. And then you had an opportunity to come back as a professor. And I just wonder, what was that experience like? Having the opportunity to come back here, was that something you eagerly embraced?
Well, I needed a job. I was working on my master's thesis, and they had a crisis. They had too many students and no teachers. So they said, "Would you come back for 1 year?" And I said, well, I don't have a master's. And I said, well, that's all right, graduate students teach in universities, we can cover that, don't worry, for 1 year. Turned out to be 42. But, I was accepted, you know, and I was amazed at how, well, for one thing, the faculty was sort of faculty. It had a lot of older people and a lot of younger people. And it was a great faculty. And, you know, it was very easy, basically. No problems.
And the 1950s, 1960s, there's a lot going on in America, and one of those things is the civil rights movement.
Yes.
And Brown versus Board of Education, and the integration of college campuses.
Yes.
And you arrived here right in the midst
In the
of
middle,
that discussion. Yeah. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
You know, I think of it as urban agrarian conflict. And those aren't good terms, I can't think of any better. Erskine had, as other colleges, run pretty well until after the Civil War. It was horrible, no money. The people that started Erskine were agrarians, they were big landowners who had a lot of slaves, who had a lot of money, and couldn't afford to start school. And they were agrarians. In the 1890s, of course, the movement to cities meant that the small towns and urban, the rural areas were losing population, and the church was losing members. And so the church began to go into cities and set up churches, ARP churches. By the end of the 1890s, there were a lot of big urban centers. By the Second World War, Charlotte, which had over half the ARPs in the world, had big steeple ARP churches. There were several issues that came up. One was singing songs. ARPs, like all Presbyterians, exclusively sang songs. Most Presbyterians had changed and accepted hymns, but we kept songs forever, it seemed like. And the other ARP synods, the Synod of the North and the Synod of the West, had joined other Presbyterians and created the United Presbyterian Church. So those urbanites in Charlotte wanted to join that denomination, wanted our denomination to go in there. So there were real cleavages, and it did split the people apart pretty good. And it was mainly an urban-rural split, although you can't really, that dichotomy like that's difficult to make perfect, but that's basically what it was. And so that's the background. There'd been these two gigantic fights in the church over whether we were going to unite, which we didn't do, or sing songs, which we said we would sometime off in the future. So those two votes divided the church pretty good between the big urban churches and the smaller rural churches. And then this issue, Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, which meant that, which required public colleges and universities to integrate. It required private colleges and universities to comply with the order. You had to sign a compliance. Well, slowly the private colleges did that in South Carolina, except for Erskine. And the board signed a non-compliance, and they said, we ain't gonna do it, basically. And I was on the faculty, and 14 of us wrote a letter and requested the board to reconsider their decision. And, it was a very difficult situation because all over the denomination they wrote letters in, fire the 14. And we kind of felt under a lot of pressure. I'm the last, no one else is here from those 14, an awful lot of good people. The people who disagreed with us and half the faculty who didn't want to comply, they were good people too. They just had a difficult opinion. And that was a very tense time. We complied eventually. I won't mention his name, but the first year that there were African Americans here, there were two, one female, one male. I don't remember her name, I remember his name, but I don't mention it. She ended up with a PhD somewhere at the University of California, I'm not sure exactly where. He took my intro history course, and the first, we had 3 essay tests and an essay exam. He made an 89 on the essay, first essay test. And he came to me and he said, I'm getting an A in this class. I said, look at it realistically. You got an 89, you got to get a 93 average to have an A, and you've got 2 tests and exam to go. Do you think that's possible? He said, yes. And I said, well, I've written all over your paper. You can see what you didn't have. If you look in your notes and see if you had it there, you know you got to study more. If you didn't have it in your notes, you got to take better notes. And he said, okay. Well, he got an A. But he transferred to Harvard. So, I don't know what he was after, but he got what he wanted. The other thing that I think about when I think about that compliance issue is it was a long term, it was going on for years. That was a bitter defeat for people who did not want to integrate. And there were terribly bitter things said about the president and the faculty and everybody. My family didn't like what I did. People in my church didn't like it. And it was really hard, not personally, but for the institution, to have those kind of terribly bitter feelings that persisted for decades. And there was this guy who gave a lot of money to Erskine. And it suddenly cut off. And I was told by the fundraisers that when the board did not comply, he said, I'll never give you another penny. Well, quite some time later, he died. And the president asked me if I would represent the college with the family, the funeral. So I did, the funeral. And I said, well, I got to go to the house. He had 3 children. I got to tell the children I was sorry. When I walked up to that house, there were 3 cars were parked in front of the house with 3 Rolls Royces. What this college missed in that particular instance, hard to say. And there are other examples like that. So it was a very divisive and costly situation. We got to learn.
And I believe the president at the time was Whiteman, was that his name?
Joe Whiteman was a veteran of the Second World War. He saw some horrible fights. He really did. And he was in Oxford, I think Christchurch. I think he was Christchurch, College of Oxford University. And he had a master's from Oxford. And he came over and taught here and got a PhD at USC. And was president. When he would, you go down the hall and hold up the letter. Somebody else wants me to fire you. And I knew what to say.
Don't give him any ideas. But I raised the question because I think that is Whiteman at the back in the blue. If you want to look at him and read a little bit.
Oh yeah. Joe was an absolutely wonderful person, and one of the great things about coming back here, he treated me like an equal, and he had been sort of my mentor. And Lowry Ware, who was a faculty member, became maybe my best friend the rest of our lives.
Well, you spent a long time in the classroom, and then you became an administrator as well. I wonder what that transition was like.
It was difficult, and I had an uncle that started Westminster Schools in Atlanta, and he said, "Don't worry. The most mobile group of people in the world, college faculty, and give them a few years and they won't know who you are." so I did that, and it was pretty difficult at times because I had to, at times you have to fire people, and you had to do it. And sometimes there were people like you have to do what you have to do. But I liked it. But I never quit teaching. And I decided, as soon as I can get the opening, I'm going back to Left Africa.
Yeah.
And did.
That's what people tend to say. I think if you go through the faculty and administration, they say, I want to get back to the faculty.
Well, I like to read, and I always took a course, and each time I taught it, one semester, I read everything that had been published that I could find that I hadn't read, and made out new notes. That meant my notes might be 4 or 5 years old, because but I loved that.
And so 42 years then?
Yeah.
And so I wonder, looking back almost 42 years, and even since being connected to Erskine, what do you think makes this such a, you're clearly drawn to this place, what makes it a special place to you?
I think right now the most important two things, I think, and they're not unique. The size and the location. You can have really good faculty and administration and everything else, but when you have so few students, they are forced to confront each other and to get along with each other. And they may have quarrels, but they've always got a friend who has a friend of the other person, seems to be, and you always work things out. And you can't go, well, of course, we didn't have a lot of mobility back then, they had more now. But being in this place, you just have to be with everybody, whether you like them or not. And you gotta learn to like them. Yeah. You get along with it. And I think that socialization is very important.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us this evening, and thank you for all that you do for Erskine.
I don't know about you all, but that was a treat for me. Please feel free to roam through the room to read, if you have time, about some other presidents that were not mentioned in the presentations tonight. There are refreshments in the back. The display that's here in front of the room, you're welcome to take a look and take as much time as you'd like. The next event will be on the other side, on the women's side of the campus. So, you'll have to walk, take the sidewalk all the way to the other side of town, or across the road, and you'll get there. Concert starts at 7:30, and there's still tickets that you can purchase if you don't have one yet. Again, I will say thank you for coming tonight on behalf of the Board of Trustees and the Inauguration Steering Committee. Thank you, have a good evening, and enjoy the rest of the festivities.